Rugby World Rankings for the 15th of July 2024, folks. South Africa's seemingly unassailable lead at the top of the Rugby World Rankings has been much narrowed with their home loss to Ireland. New Zealand also closing in on the top two. Australia, despite winning their series 2-0 over the Welsh, have dropped a spot in the World Rankings. Eddie Jones's Japan side also dropping. We'll go through the rankings changes for the week that was, the permutations for the upcoming week of games, and you guys can let us know your thoughts on how fair or not you think the rankings are as they currently sit. I mentioned South Africa. They were like 4 points ahead going into their second game against Ireland, but Ireland don't like to lose 2 games in a row. Famous drop goal at the end from Kieran Frawley sees the two sides narrow in terms of their rankings points. South Africa still number one, but only like a point ahead of Ireland. So very, very spicy between those two teams. They are building a really, really nice rivalry. And Rassie and Andy Farrell, I would have loved to see a third game between them just to see kind of who comes out in terms of that tactical nous getting the best out of their sides. New Zealand, I mentioned, they've taken a little bit of pointage off the English. Remember, they were at home, and there's a decent gap between New Zealand and England. So they didn't take a heck of a lot, up from 90.12 to 90.37, but still tracking in the right direction. And France lost a fair chunk of points because they lost away to Argentina. They did take a kind of somewhat inexperienced side out to Argentina, won the first game, lost the second. But the rankings doesn't really care what team you field. It is the national team that plays, and it is the national team that gains or loses points. So there's formed a little bit of a gap, I guess, between fourth and third. England, as I said, with their loss to England, dropped kind of minor points to New Zealand. And then Scotland, with their big win over the States, didn't get any points out of that one. Remembering that you don't get any points from a team from which you are more than 10 points ahead of. So Scotland, with their tour to the Americas, not likely to get any points because all the teams they're playing are pretty well below them. Argentina's gone up, not enough to catch Scotland, but they've certainly gone up with that win over the French. And then the Italians and Australians are perhaps the most interesting movers of this week's World Rankings because it seems kind of counterintuitive. I mean, both sides won, but Australia beat Wales, they've gone down. Italy beat Tonga, they've gone up. You may be asking yourself, how the hell does that work? Basically, if you're ranked above another team, you're going to take more points from them if the gap between you is close. If the gap between you is quite far, you are not going to take as many points. And you need to remember also, the home side gets scored with plus 3 points in mind. So Australia, despite the fact that their gap between them and Wales is not that far, Australia would have been scored at plus 3. So they would have been in the 80s for their game against Wales. Whereas Italy were away, so they're plus nothing. And the side they're playing in Tonga would have been at plus 3. So once you take the plus 3 home advantages in both games into account, the gap between Italy and Tonga was actually slightly closer than the gap between Australia and Wales. And then you double down on the fact that you can take more points if you get a 16-point or more win. You get less points if the score is 1-15. Australia won by 8. Italy won by 22. So Italy faced a team which was closer to them on the rankings, and they beat them by a bigger margin. Basically is why Italy ended up taking more points than Australia and did enough to pass the Aussies. It still seems a bit weird, but the maths checks out. So Australia, despite the fact they've gone up in their points total, have gone down in their ranking. Fiji didn't play, but they got the All Blacks coming this weekend. They are still in 10th. Wales, although they dropped points, not enough to fall below the Georgians, so they are still in 11th on the right-hand side of my whiteboard. The Georgians are one of the biggest movers this week with their famous win over Eddie Jones's Japanese side away from home. So they've gone up from 72.95 to 74.36. So cracking move from the Georgians. I feel like, along with Fiji, the Georgians are a lot of people's kind of favorite second team, just because we want them to get more games, and the more wins they can put in over a side like Japan, hopefully means they'll get more games like that. Like Japan tends to get a fair few Tier 1 fixtures, you feel like, because there's more financial incentives for teams to play Japan. Less so with Georgia, but if the Georgians keep putting in the results, you would hope they would get the reward. Samoa beat Spain in their game. They don't get any change because they were home. And with the plus 3 home advantage, the gap between the sides is more than 10 points. So hard-fought win, though, for the Samoans. They didn't do it by much, only 4 points in the end. Japan, as I mentioned, have dropped points to the Georgians, so dropped 2 spots, down from 12th into 14th. So Eddie Jones's pre-taking over Japan talk about wanting to get into the kind of basically this side of the whiteboard. Seems a little bit premature, but he has only been with the side for a short time, so we'll give Eddie time. Portugal's up with their win over the Namibians. The Tongans are down with their loss to the Italians. Uruguay, no change. USA, no change, despite they lost to the Scots. Spain, no change. And Romania are still in 20th, but they lost some points to Canada. Like, it's a weird little circle because Romania beat the USA, and USA tends to be better than Canada, but then Canada beat Romania. So good on the Canadians. The men's team tends to not have a lot of good news stories going on, but the Canadians got a win. So they are just off the whiteboard in 21st spot. What are the possible permutations for this weekend? Probably not a lot of changes unless there's a big upset, because we've got a lot of Tier 1 against Tier 2 games this weekend. Like New Zealand's playing Fiji. New Zealand aren't going to take any points for that one. It's a neutral venue, so the +3 thing doesn't take any, not taken into account for this one, but Fiji will get some points if they win, but New Zealand aren't going to get anything if they win. Same with South Africa, Portugal. Gap's too big for South Africa to take any points. And the same with Argentina playing Uruguay. Argentina is not going to take any points. The only side which has potential to take some points is the Australians. Can take kind of marginal points off the Georgians if they are to get a win, because the gap between the sides is just kind of close enough for them to do so with their kind of home advantage. Also, Tonga's playing Spain. Tonga can pass Portugal if they get a win. And Japan is playing Italy. Japan can go back past Samoa if they were to get a win. Chile are playing Scotland. Scotland aren't going to take any points if they get a win there. But that one should be a pretty entertaining one because Chile like to play some pretty expansive rugby. In the women's game, New Zealand was past Canada to go into second spot in the world rankings with their thumping win over the Wallaroos. How fair or not do you guys reckon the rankings look? They seem pretty solid for mine. But, yeah, hopefully Joe Schmidt, from a New Zealand perspective, can get the Wallabies a bit higher, because I feel like this part of the world needs a strong Aussie rugby team just to be good for the game. If you like rugby content, subscribe to the channel. I would appreciate it. You guys take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.